Askeladd and Bjorn are complimenting the London Bridge, claiming it looks more like a fortress. Bjorn adds he only came along because Askeladd believed London would be a pushover, but Askeladd didn't expect that Thorkell, one of the mightiest Danish warriors, would betray his men and switch sides to England. Bjorn is disgusted that Thorkell swapped teams for gold, but Askeladd reminds him that as mercenaries they effectively do the exact same thing, as do most neighboring clans. Siding with the winner is all that matters. But Bjorn says it's not the gold he does it for, it's simply the killing. Bjorn asks Askeladd if he has a plan, and Askeladd's only plan is to once again call for Thorfinn. He tells the kid to go and get him Thorkell's head, and Thorfinn asks what his reward will be. Askeladd laughs, saying he will offer him yet another duel, and that Thorfinn simply never learns from fights he can't win, just like his father. Thorfinn doesn't appreciate that, smashing his jug of wine, and saying their next duel will be Askeladd's last. Askeladd throws him back his dagger and tells him to get started. If Thorfinn can get Thorkell's head, Askeladd will give him any number of duels he wants. A single ship approaches the bridge. The English open fire, but Floki calls out saying he's simply an envoy for a message, but the English don't care. Eventually, the gigantic Thorkell stops them to converse with Floki. Floki informs Thorkell that the king is feeling merciful, and will allow the lives of all the men to live along with keeping their possessions, if they surrender. Defending further is pointless, as the King of England has already fled to France. He also desperately wants Thorkell to return to his rightful spot in the Danish army. Floki wonders why Thorkell would switch sides, since they used to fight together as brothers. Thorkell's response is very simple. First, he insults the English in Norse tongue, meaning they don't even notice their captain's remarks. He also adds that the result of the war is already decided, the English will likely lose. Floki misunderstands this as Thorkell wanting to rejoin, but Thorkell says that fighting as the underdog is endlessly more fun than constantly winning. Thorkell says enough talking, back to the action. Floki tries to offer Thorkell double what the English are paying, and Thorkell repays him with what's effectively a goddamn mountain. The men row as hard as possible in retreat. Floki informs the king of his failure in bringing back Thorkell, and the king orders him to launch an attack. Arrows fly back and forth, some hitting shields and some killing soldiers. One boat makes it to the bridge, and begins chopping it down. Thorkell brings another tree and rains hell down on the boat, wiping out a number of warships in total. Thorkell is mocking the tactics of the Danes, before noticing a young blonde-haired boy staring him down with a stoic face. Askeladd confirms the identity of Thorkell, and sends Thorfinn onto the bridge. Thorkell orders his men to leave the boy alone, as he looks like a lot of fun to fight. Swinging the tree at Thorfinn, he jumps off it and lands cleanly on the bridge. He athletically dodges more of Thorkell's swings, and the latter compliments his ability. He warns his men again not to touch Thorfinn, and will give the suicidal kid what he craves, throwing his tree away to fight with his bare fists. Thorfinn is insulted by this, thinking he's been underestimated. But as we soon find out, it is actually Thorfinn who's underestimating Thorkell. Thorfinn charges in, shocked at Thorkell's speed. He lands a cut, but Thorkell was quick to realize that Thorfinn was aiming for his wrists. He compliments the kid's strategy, and Thorfinn realizes that one punch from this man would likely kill him immediately. Thorkell is the next to engage, but Thorfinn dodges again before nearly landing a hit to his neck. Thorfinn realizes he's going to struggle hitting a vital point of this monstrous man. Thorfinn changes his strategy, jumping behind him and knocking him off balance. He uses this brief opening to finally stab the man. However, the result isn't what Thorfinn expected. Thorkell allowed himself to be stabbed through the hand, and while briefly mentioning the pain, now has a firm grip on Thorfinn and flings him around like a toy. Askeladd remarks Thorfinn is getting his ass handed to him, as we see him slammed into the bridge repeatedly. The retreat signal is drummed, and the army leave Thorfinn on the bridge alone. Thorkell is disappointed that the army is leaving after things were getting fun. He apologizes to Thorfinn as his troops have left him behind, but realizes the boy is completely unconscious. He tries to wake him up, when suddenly, Thorfinn's fight emerges and he frees himself from the giant's grasp. Thorkell is gobsmacked that Thorfinn hasn't lost the will to fight yet, and demands for the warrior's name. Thorfinn, son of Thors, which blows Thorkell's mind. He tries to ask if he is the son of the mighty troll of Yam, but Thorfinn immediately flees off the bridge. Thorkell waves him goodbye, complimenting Thorfinn's skills and saying they should fight again sometime. The devastated army are laying defeated, and Floki is informing the king that they will need a year, or 6 months at least, to break London, depending on the city's provisions. King Sweyn says this is too long, and will leave 4,000 troops behind to siege London while the rest march west. The leader of the 4,000 troops will be left to Prince Canute, which Canute's advisor strongly opposes. The king says that Prince Canute simply isn't a strong enough man, and needs to gain experience on the battlefield. Thorfinn emerges from the river. With a dislocated shoulder, sprained ankle, and broken ribs, he finds his way back to the army. Askeladd is shocked he's still alive, but says if he can't keep up with the troops he'll be left behind. Thorfinn pops his shoulder back into place, and starts marching. He reminisces on Thorkell's words. How can he find fighting fun? Nothing about war is fun whatsoever. The troops left behind to siege London are complaining about the prince being in charge of them. He's not fit to manage troops, but before they can finish their conversation a rock crashes down out of nowhere. The English assume it's a catapult, but nope, it's just a giant Thorkell throwing rocks from the bridge. He goads them to attack, and the men desperately try to convince Ragnar, the prince's advisor, to retaliate with an assault, but he warns them that's exactly what Thorkell wants. A soldier joins Thorkell on the bridge, where he tells Thorkell the opposition are likely being careful since they're being led by the Danish prince. This excites Thorkell greatly, realizing there's such a prime hostage to capture. Thorfinn awakes in a beautiful field. His mother and sister are there, and the men of his village are slacking off, as always. Realizing it's time for dinner, he leaves to call for his father. Thorfinn joyfully rides on his father's shoulders as the two converse about the beauty of the warm lands therein. Thors reminds his son that it's his duty to protect his mother and sister, and how both are eagerly awaiting his return, before also stating the wonderfulness of having people care about you. He tells Thorfinn to stop his quest for revenge, stating it's not something that would make him happy. Suddenly, this imaginary village is attacked and the village folk are being taken away in chains. Thorfinn shouts that they need to do something, but arrows fly over and he watches the fate of his father a second time. He screams, waking himself up from the dream. He leaves the barn he's sleeping in search for some quiet. We're cut to Askeladd's men raiding an English village. Two men begin to bicker about wanting to raid a larger village, and Bjorn converses with another Viking about the shortcomings of this year's raids. Their conversation is interrupted by the earlier two men breaking out into a fight. Bjorn allows the fight to proceed and says if one of them dies to clean up the body. Thorfinn finds some peace and quiet, and acknowledges how nice the land looks. He's interrupted by Askeladd, who appears to be doing the same. He asks Thorfinn if the men are too loud for him, but Thorfinn bluntly says not to talk to him like they're friends. He reminds Askeladd that he's not one of his men, and when Askeladd is rotting in the ground, nobody will remember him. That's dark stuff, Askeladd replies, and remarks Thorfinn still has a lot of growing up to do. However, he admits the day will come when Thorfinn will likely kill him. Time is on Thorfinn's side and Askeladd is growing old. He begins to lecture Thorfinn on the history of England. It was once a more advanced civilization led by the Romans, but was conquered by the Saxons. The age of men is growing old and Askeladd realizes it. Suddenly, they notice a single rider approaching them. They call out to him, and he rides over. He explains that he's a soldier from the 4,000 men led by Prince Canute, and is on his way to link up with the main army. Askeladd explains the main army is very far away, and the soldier wonders why Askeladd and his men are here. After saying to simply liberate some nearby villages, the man becomes angered that they're separated from the main army without permission, but Askeladd offers him a fresh horse if he comes back with them. It's then they learn that Thorkell and 500 men attacked Prince Canute's army, and ended up taking Canute hostage. On top of that, he is shadowing the main army and marching towards them too. The soldier asks Askeladd to join him, and together they can rescue the prince from captivity. Askeladd briefly mutters some nonsense about wanting to fade away in the twilight, confusing Bjorn. But suddenly, he decapitates the man heading to the main army, and gives his men the new orders. They will rescue the hostage from Thorkell alone, and claim all the compensation from either the Danish or English king, depending on whoever pays more. This gives his men the motivation they desperately needed, but Bjorn is concerned. Askeladd and his 100 men versus Thorkell and his 500, can they really win? Who knows, Askeladd says, but the twilight Askeladd keeps mentioning is soon approaching, and they should raise as much hell as possible while they're still able to. We begin with a brief history lesson, telling us in the 11th century, the invasion of the Danish army and the Vikings became more and more severe. But after several years, we reached a turning point in October. The king informs Floki that marching in winter hinders their forces, and he will allow them to rest for now to restore their spirits. Next summer, they will launch major offenses. Askeladd's Vikings head home, demoralized at the lack of loot they've pillaged this year. Bjorn reminds Askeladd that returning home with a lack of riches would be dire, and they've already raided all nearby prosperous villages. Askeladd confirms that their plan is simple. Move towards wherever the food is plentiful. We're then cut to a siege on a French fortress. The attackers attempt to get a battering ram through the gate, but the French defense are equipped with the advanced technology of crossbows, and massacre all men at the gate, forcing them to retreat. The defending troops celebrate their victory. Askeladd is spectating, and can smell the treasure sitting inside the fortress. The troops are motivated, saying Askeladd never lets them down. Askeladd calls on Thorfinn, and with daggers in hand, they start to plan. Askeladd tells Thorfinn to send a message to the French attackers. Askeladd and his men will help them capture the fortress, and both armies will split the treasure. Thorfinn hesitates, and Askeladd asks what the problem is. Thorfinn reminds him of all the people he's killed, implying he's met the conditions for another duel which Askeladd is running away from. Askeladd offers him gold coins, which angers Thorfinn. It's not money he wants, it's Askeladd's head. Askeladd says fine, if you want to duel so bad, bring me the head of the defender's commander, and Thorfinn sets off immediately. Bjorn asks if the plan is wise, but Askeladd says it's not uncommon for messengers to be killed, and if they lose Thorfinn it's no big deal. Thorfinn arrives at the gate, and asks if anyone there can speak Norse. They don't understand what he's saying, and attempt to grab him, but Thorfinn denies this and asks again if anyone can speak Norse. They take him to their leader, and find a translator. This fat, wide-mouthed leader is angered that the Vikings want half the spoils from the fortress. Thorfinn says their offensive plans are weak, attacking the gate is illogical and they should advance from the river, but one higher-up soldier says doing so is impossible, since there is a waterfall preventing any ships from advancing from that direction. Thorfinn says fine, if you say no, Askeladd and his men will join the enemy, provoking a hostile reaction from the French. Thorfinn is unfazed, saying if he dies and can't signal Askeladd, extra Vikings will be enemies of these men. The chubby leader reluctantly agrees, and Thorfinn demands for his weapons. 1 high arrow and 2 low, Askeladd and his men receive the signal. The attackers who are guarding their ships stuck at the waterfall notice something in the woods. It's a dragon, and they're all terrified. The next morning, they prepare to attack again, but the chubby leader is being warned that the men spotted a dragon in the woods, and it's a bad omen to attack. The leader, referring to Thorfinn as Garson, asks where his men are, and before the translator can ask Thorfinn interrupts him and says just get the attack started already, fat ass. The leader may not understand, but he knows Thorfinn just insulted him. They begin the siege. Askeladd and his men realize the fighting has started and work double time, and Askeladd appears to be riding something, but it isn't a horse. The French defenses are as sturdy as ever, while Thorfinn asks the translator which one the enemy commander is. He points him out as the man on the wall with feathers on his helmet, and Thorfinn shoots off. Enraged at him running, the leader demands the men to shoot him, and they all miss as he brutally insults his men, who seem very unhappy with him being in command. Suddenly, a rumbling comes from the trees. Askeladd's men are running at full pace, along with the dragons spotted the night before. Suddenly, they emerge from the trees, with all men carrying and running with their warships. Askeladd is loving it, and Thorfinn wildly leaps over the moat and slams his daggers into the wall. The men fling their boats into the lake, and they begin to row around to the other entrance to the castle previously blocked by the waterfall. The French defenders could have never predicted such a thing, and the commander takes his crossbowmen elsewhere, and Thorfinn subtly scales the wall. Askeladd's men sail through to the castle, where the crossbowmen await their arrival. From a great distance, the arrows are still lethal, and only then do they realize the power of these weapons. However, their orders are interrupted by the sounds of their men dying. Thorfinn is on the wall, and the men are stunned at such a young boy being here. Askeladd's men wonder why they stopped firing, but Askeladd already knows. Thorfinn defeats one man, and walks forward menacingly, ready to take on the rest. One by one, he takes out multiple men, and makes very quick work of their commander. Unfortunately, the head falls into the moat, and Thorfinn is forced to dive in after it. Askeladd's men arrive in the fort, and begin terrorizing everyone. Due to their distraction, the French attackers are able to breach the gate as well. However, they enter to an unpredictable scenario. All the defending troops are practically already dead. The French leader laughs at their victory, saying the defenders were no match for the leader's omnipotent tactics. His higher-up informs him the captain was killed by the kid, and the leader says if they allow the Vikings to leave, they may become their enemies, and plots to have them killed also. They will attack the Vikings when they carry their ships back out of the water. Suddenly, a stressed soldier reports to the leader, the treasure house is not just missing 50% of the loot, it's completely empty. The Vikings took it all. Askeladd calls out to them, and dripped out to the max, he informs the French that they have split the loot 50-50. Victory, and the castle is all theirs, but the treasure all belongs to the Vikings. They plan to leave down the waterfall without Thorfinn, since he's probably dead anyway, but a head flies onto the boat and Thorfinn emerges. Thorfinn calls Askeladd out on his promise, and challenges him to a duel. Askeladd accepts, but says they should probably get out of here first. The dragon the men were scared of comes flying down the waterfall, and the Vikings finally head home. Danish shepherds see warships approaching, but realize it's Askeladd's ships, and welcome him back with cheerful waves. Thorfinn prepares his weapons for the duel. The men in the village are amazed at Askeladd's haul this year, and wonder if he's recruiting more men. Thorfinn barges past him, and demanding an apology, quickly changes his mind when he sees Thorfinn's glare. The women of the village celebrate Askeladd's return. Askeladd's uncle, who runs the village, is calculating each and every price for food and drink for his men. But Askeladd doesn't care and just says feed them everything, he'll pay in full. He asks his uncle to be an observer for a duel, and tells his uncle that he is incapable of handling his slave correctly, saying each person has a unique characteristic to be controlled, just like he's doing with Thorfinn. The crowd eagerly await the duel. The crowd admit Thorfinn looks capable, but still root for Askeladd mostly. With no objections to the duel, they begin. Askeladd realizes how much Thorfinn has matured, but before he can continue, Thorfinn rushes in, shocking both Askeladd and the crowd. He swings Thorfinn away, and while some believe Thorfinn was sent flying from Askeladd's swing, Bjorn corrects this, saying Thorfinn jumped back to reset the skirmish. Bjorn also realizes Thorfinn has grown tremendously. With advanced tactics, Thorfinn disarms Askeladd, but Askeladd is quick to react and Thorfinn must retreat. Askeladd also changes his tactics, from physical fighting to psychological warfare, and begins disrespecting Thorfinn's father's name. He pretends to not even remember his father, asking what his name was. Thoki? It's Thors! Thorfinn shouts. But Askeladd says he can't even remember his father, asking if Thorfinn is sure Askeladd even killed him, before getting his name wrong again and calling him Thorkell. He asks Thorfinn how he killed him, and says Thorfinn must be misremembering. It works, and Thorfinn is triggered, saying if they fought fair and square Askeladd would have been defeated, but he resorted to taking Thorfinn hostage like a coward. Askeladd says, "Oh, now I remember, he was the fool who sacrificed himself for his son." Thorfinn erupts and charges Askeladd, disappointing Bjorn. Being too reckless, Askeladd easily grabs his arm and sweeps him, and says Thorfinn still has a lot to learn, before dislocating his shoulder and winning the duel, making Thorfinn pass out from the pain. He spares him, and tells Bjorn to pop his shoulder back into place, before saying he's hungry and ordering some mutton breast. The men are feasting in celebration. A man returns, saying Thorfinn didn't want to swap off from watch duty, likely due to the ship being his father's and feeling comfortable there. A young man approaches Askeladd and praises his duel, but asks if it's risky keeping Thorfinn around. But Askeladd confirms Thorfinn would never kill him outside a duel, demonstrating his psychological ability, something his uncle clearly lacks as he belittles and whips his slave for underperforming. Thorfinn is hallucinating on the boat, seeing his father. He asks if Thorfinn wants revenge, and says if he told Thorfinn to stop, he likely wouldn't listen. Thors isn't sure what to say, and reminds him that Thorfinn has no enemies, no one deserves to be hurt, and a true warrior needs no sword. A hand reaches out to Thorfinn, and he reflexively pulls his dagger on them, only to find it's the slave girl. She says she was sent to bring him food. She remains on the cold boat while Thorfinn eats, asking if he's a slave too. Thorfinn says he would never be a slave, and if he were, he would kill his captive and anyone else who stood in his way. She responds she could never kill, and even if she ran, she would only meet more war and slavery. Thorfinn responds, saying far to the west there's a warm, fertile land, where the arms of war and slavery can't reach, reciting Leif's words to him he was told as a child. Prince Canute, the king, and several bands of Danish Vikings including the Jomsviking, are preparing to set sail for a mass invasion of England. Sir Ragnar, Prince Canute's advisor, opposes bringing Canute due to his inexperience, but the king says as heir to the throne he must grow up eventually. The army sets sail, and upon arriving in England, the 5 largest towns were forced to surrender. They continued to advance south, steamrolling everything in their way. Their momentum finally came to a halt when they ran into London. Showing its great defense, Thorkell throws an axe from the London Bridge, defeating several attackers at once. Thorkell insults their attacks, and says the battle is only just beginning. Thorkell and his men are marching towards King Sweyn's main force, 500 troops versus 16,000. These fierce men are marching as true warriors, eager to meet a valiant end in battle and attain access to Valhalla. Suddenly, the priest freaks out. He starts claiming he can see the Lord, and Sir Ragnar realizes he's sober and demands someone to bring the priest some strong alcohol. Upon drinking some, he settles down again. Thorkell's men ask the priest who he thinks the better gods are, the Viking gods or the Christians' god. He simply replies, whichever one created drink, erupting the men with laughter. The men all stop simultaneously. Thorkell steps down and is thrown a spear and judges the whereabouts of the enemy. His aim is perfect. One man announces they're part of Sir Ragnar's troops and demands the release of the prince. He claims to have 2,000 men and pleads with Thorkell, assuring them mercy if they comply. But before he can finish his demands, the prince is already given back to them. Thorkell says that now he's returned the prince, there is no reason to hold back, and they can empty their rage. The men are angered by this provocation, and Ragnar tells them to settle down, but they claim if they allow Thorkell to belittle them, they will live in shame as cowards by retreating. Thorkell salts the wound by claiming their 2,000 men are scared of a measly 500, and Ragnar has lost control of his own troops, and they charge in recklessly. However, it turns out Askeladd is here too. They're dousing the forest in oil, and Thorkell is going absolutely sicko mode on these troops. Thorkell complains about their lack of troops, before smelling something suspicious. It's a charcoal fire. Askeladd's men are burning the forest, and many men are caught in the flames. No one can tell friend from foe, and Thorkell's men say they should leave, but Thorkell realizes this fire wasn't started by Ragnar's men, and becomes excited at the introduction of a third party. Guess who Askeladd calls on? Yep, it's Thorfinn. They douse him in water and tell him to go rescue the prince. Bjorn realizes that despite everything Askeladd says, he genuinely trusts Thorfinn to get difficult jobs done. Sir Ragnar is almost killed by one of his own men due to the smoke. Scolding him for his stupidity, they hear other soldiers calling out to the prince. Ragnar explains that's what smart people do, call out before attacking blindly. They respond that the prince is over here, but it turns out these were enemy troops pretending to be on their side, and Ragnar is actually the ignorant one. Surrounded, a flaming horse comes flying past, and Thorfinn lands majestically. Ready to take on the men, he makes swift work of one of them, but suddenly Thorkell can be heard calling for Thorfinn, kinda sounding like Mr. Krabs.
Aha! I just knew I had seen you, my boy!
He asks him if back in London, he said he was the son of Thors, which means his mother's name is Helga. Thorfinn can't believe he knows this, but Thorkell is equally shocked that the son of the Troll of Yam is here, a name which strikes fear in the men around him. Thorkell informs Thorfinn that his father was the only man potentially a greater warrior than himself. Before they can continue, a burning tree falls, and Thorkell lets Thorfinn take the prince, saying they're both heading to the same place anyway. King Sweyn's main force in Gainsborough. 2 men are looking for their troops. One calls out for Captain Thorkell, and the other calls out for Sir Ragnar. Realizing they're on different sides, they draw their weapons but are both killed by a volley of Askeladd's arrows. Wondering if Thorfinn will return, he arrives with the prince under his protection. Ragnar reluctantly puts the prince in Askeladd's care, and Askeladd swears loyalty to him, before asking to see the prince's face. Upon taking off his helmet, everyone is shocked, wondering if this so-called prince is actually a princess due to his feminine face. Askeladd spots a ferry worker, and rides over to ask how much to travel to the far bank over there. He says 2 silver, or booze, but it would take days to take all of his men. Fortunately, he only requires him to take this letter, and asks for him to hurry. He sets off immediately. Sir Ragnar walks over to Bjorn, angered at why they've stopped marching. He tells him to be quiet, and the ear asks Bjorn to tell this conehead to stop breathing as it's disrupting his work. The ear informs Askeladd that Thorkell's troops, who are pursuing them, are closer than they were yesterday, and will catch up in a few days. The ear tells them to be quiet, and hears 2 riders on the hill over there. Thorkell's troops now know where they are. Wondering what they should do, Askeladd informs them that he's already requested reinforcements, and they simply need to hold out until they arrive. The troops are confused and tired, wondering who these reinforcements are that Askeladd promised, since the nearest fort is 2 weeks away in Leicester. Catching some sleep in the evening, Bjorn approaches Askeladd, saying the men are getting anxious. Askeladd says that will only hasten their march, and Bjorn should get some sleep. Bjorn asks what's bothering Askeladd. He responds that he can tell a man simply from his face, and when he saw the prince's face, that is no face of a king. Bjorn says the prince is still young, and Askeladd says yes, his time will come, confusing Bjorn. Askeladd interrupts their conversation, telling all the men to wake up, since they're going to start marching, making you wonder why he just told Bjorn to get some sleep. The troops march, and march some more. They're all getting very sick and tired of marching. The ear tells Askeladd that Thorkell's troops are right on their tail, and will catch up soon. Askeladd informs them they're already at the rendezvous point. 2 men? The troops are concerned. Askeladd approaches them, and kneels. The man says it's been a long time since they've met, and in the distance the troops vaguely see 3 warships here to collect them. Thorkell's is disheartened since they lost the trail of young Thorfinn, and one troop asks if the English switched sides, since why would they help the Danish prince? Thorkell says this troop has no idea where he is, as that land is in England. It's Wales, a mountainous region, poor in natural resources. It's ununified, with multiple kingdoms holding their own territory, one of which responded to Askeladd's help. Ragnar praises Askeladd, saying now they can take the ships all the way to Gainsborough, but Askeladd disagrees, saying they will travel by land. 3 warships is a big deal to a small kingdom, and they should be grateful for any help at all. Ragnar is concerned with making the prince travel through enemy territory, so Askeladd assigns Thorfinn to protect the prince himself. The commander of this kingdom approaches, saying they only help for a non-aggression treaty with the Danes, should Prince Canute eventually become king. However, The prince is too timid to respond to the man. The commander refuses to speak through Ragnar, and will ask the prince again later. The troops continue their march, and the commander informs Askeladd he's already arranged a safe passage through the next kingdom. Though the commander is concerned with this prince, wondering if he's cut out to be a king, Askeladd asks if the commander still believes in the old tale, that one day the great Artorios will return from the west and restore the great Britannia of the old. Before he can answer, the ear informs Bjorn of something, who informs Askeladd. They meet the leaders of the next kingdom, but Askeladd warns Commander Gratianas of something. Thorfinn notices too. They're surrounded, and Welsh men are ready to ambush. They open fire, killing Askeladd's horse immediately. Suddenly we're cut to a familiar face. It's Leif, from Thorfinn's village. He mistakes a slave for Thorfinn, and becomes stressed, remembering his ultimate goal of finding Thorfinn and returning him to Helga. The next episode starts with an unknown child carrying a woman onto shore. He speaks in very broken Welsh, saying his mother will die soon and wanted to return home. The Danish troops continue their assault on England, crushing the army at Wessex. The king asks Floki what became of London, and his son the prince. Floki informs him that Thorkell defeated them, and while they know a battle ensued in a forest in Marlborough, they're unsure where the prince currently resides. The king says the prince is his precious son, and they should alert him as soon as they discover his whereabouts. Back to Askeladd, the troops are very nervous, but Askeladd refuses any return fire. He calls out to the leader, who's amazed that such a savage can speak the Welsh tongue. Gratianas tells Asser, their leader, that stirring up trouble with the Danes is pointless. Asser responds with a long monologue, and Askeladd's troops wonder what this silly man is saying, and Bjorn responds that they're unlikely to break out into a fight. Despite not knowing their language, Bjorn understands that if they wanted to fight, their first volley would have killed more than just a horse. Askeladd shouts out to the men, saying before them is the prince, and demanding the prince to shout some threatening words to scare the men off. Obviously, the prince chooses to cower in fear instead, and Askeladd denies Ragnar the opportunity to speak, saying the prince will have to mature eventually. Ragnar educates Askeladd, saying the only reason the prince has lived this long in the fox den he grew up in was because he learned how to stay silent and not draw attention to himself. Askeladd says to Gratianas that he will inform the Welsh leader of their plan, and Gratianas goes with him. The prince is relieved he didn't have to speak, and Thorfinn looks at him in disgust, calling him pathetic and asking if they're really the same age. Gratianas tells Askeladd that Ragnar pampering the prince is actually a disservice to him, and Askeladd has a lot of work to do for their supposed plan. Asser dismisses his guards to talk in private. He tells Askeladd that he can't simply let Danes travel through their land, as well as supply them provisions. It would seem like they're frightened of the Danes. Askeladd asks if his answers could lead to a fight, but Asser responds that angering the king of Denmark would only bring them destruction, so such a result is unlikely. Bjorn is wondering about Askeladd. He's been with him for over a decade, and had no idea he could speak Welsh. Askeladd keeps his life very private. Asser is gobsmacked to learn about Askeladd's plan, but knows it's too far-fetched to be a lie. Askeladd is the son of Lydia, meaning the blood of the greatest Celtic commanders runs through Askeladd's veins. Asser says that means Askeladd isn't really a Dane, but Askeladd confirms he is half Danish, half Welsh. His father, Olaf, plundered Wales and took Askeladd's mother away, eventually bringing Askeladd into the world. This means that Askeladd is a direct descendant of the legendary Artorios, a supreme commander of the Great Britannia. Gratianas has proof of this, as the young boy who walked ashore at the start of the episode was a young Askeladd with his mother. Askeladd brings light to the importance of his blood. He is one with the Danes, but also has loyalty to Wales. He plans to instill the prince with his ideology, and take a seat in power when he ascends to the throne, which in turn would keep Wales safe under the Danish rule. He will ensure the Danes never set foot into Wales. Asser has one concern. How can Askeladd be sure that his Welsh blood is stronger than his Danish blood? And Askeladd says to trust him? Despite leading them for so long, There's no one he hates more than the Danish Vikings. Talks were successful. The Danes must surrender their weapons and pose as captives of the Welsh so the Welsh can save face, until they are exiled back to England where their weapons will be returned. Ragnar refuses to relinquish his weapon, and Askeladd tells Thorfinn to give up his daggers, to which Thorfinn responds, "Eat shit, old man." Thorfinn tells Conehead not to get the wrong idea. He is not one of Askeladd's men and will kill him one day. The Danes march through the Welsh lands as the civilians watch in awe. Thorfinn says to the prince, "What you looking at, princess?" and asks if the prince even has a tongue. For once, the prince responds, shocking Ragnar. The prince says he must be cautious, as every word he says has political meaning. The men all stop in surprise, hearing the prince speak for the first time, which scares him after he realizes they're all listening. Thorfinn says that's actually not a bad answer, and the prince isn't actually dumb, before saying, "Right, milady?" This angers the prince, saying no one has ever spoke to him like Thorfinn does. He begins to scold Thorfinn for his lack of manners, and Ragnar is simply amazed that the prince is speaking to someone other than him. They agree the paperwork, and continue the march. It starts snowing, and they're concerned of being snowed and around enemy territory. Askeladd informs Ragnar that they will march near a mountain, where the nearest fort is quite some time away. Askeladd orders the continue of the march, and the men are beginning to get very agitated at all this constant marching. Bjorn calms them, saying Askeladd has never failed them. But Askeladd is definitely hiding a lot from his troops. Thanks for watching, Kings. Be sure to subscribe if you enjoyed. I'll see you in the next one where we get back to the action.